So this session is about parental voice in trust strategy. Once again, hello, my name is Imanta. I'm the customer engagement manager here at Adurio. And one of my great pleasures as a part of my role is getting to talk to our customers and listening to their stories and sharing them with the broader sector through our guides, through our case studies, through our spotlights. And I'm very happy that two of those customers are being represented here today. I'm joined today by Rob Marsh from Trinity Matt and Claire Gething from Windsor Academy Trust. Can you give us a wave so that I know that you are here? Both wonderful. Hi, Claire. Hi, Rob. I'll be inviting them into the discussion a little bit later, but now I'll kind of set the scene of why we should be talking about pupil and parent voice. And like Iona said, and Ernest mentioned in the beginning, we're talking about some of the customers that are top performing in our national database. And one of those guides that we set out to uncover and talk about was pupil happiness. And we know that pupil happiness is not a soft metric. It is an essential piece, an essential foundation for learning, for development, and life. Like Dawn mentioned in the opening, it is a part of that unlocking children's potential. And across England, we know that also, schools are navigating the aftermath of the global pandemic, shifts in technology use, the increasing and mounting pressures on children's mental health. So we have to figure out how we can rise to this challenge. How can we ensure that every child feels safe, seen, and supported? Because we know that when pupils are happy, when humans are happy, essentially, they're not only more likely to thrive academically, but they are also better equipped to build their relationships, navigate change, and contribute meaningfully to their communities. And this is exactly what we heard from the schools and trusts that we interviewed for this guide. Pupil happiness and inclusion are absolutely essential to learning. Along with that, the way that schools support pupils is about building their resilience and supporting their personal growth. And a key element of that is enabling them and showing them how they can use their voice, making sure that they know that they have a voice and that they have an impact for their school communities. And finally, the linchpin of it all is how we work together. What is that team that needs to collaborate, needs to communicate, needs to have a strong relationship between the school, the trust, and the parents to ensure that pupils are completely supported. And when we look at our data about pupil happiness, we see that there are differences between primary and secondary. So we ask similar but different questions for primary and secondary. You can see primary on the left and secondary on the right. Primary pupils being more or less more positive overall about how happy they feel at school. 78% responding that they are very or quite happy, and only 44% of secondary pupils saying that they are very or quite happy studying at their school. And this difference is even more stark when we look at them over time, the trends that we see over time. In both groups, although we do see that these figures are slowly diminishing how happy pupils feel in their school, the fact that the secondary pupils are already so significantly below the primary pupils is worrisome. And so we have to look to the helpers, look to the people that are doing this work to find out what we can do to lessen this trend. And Mark Allen, head teacher at Trinity St. Edward's, describes it like this, that having a high rate of children coming to tell them things shows them that they're a happy and healthy school because they have trusted adults who will speak to them and offer them support. And this is where that pupil voice really comes in. That means children feel psychologically safe and they have that setting where they can go to a trusted adult. But there's also that element of adults listening, adults being receptive and ready to take on whatever those children have. And so when we look at the question about how valued pupil opinion is at the school, pretty evenly spread across from positive to negative responses. 34% of pupils from our national data set in the last academic year saying they feel that pupil opinion is very or quite valued. 32% say that it's not very valued or not valued at all. This is kind of where I want to bring your attention, because when we think about why are pupils, 32% of pupils saying that pupil opinion is not very valued or not valued at all? What can we ask ourselves about what we think those blockers are for these pupils? Why do they feel that their pupil opinion is not valued, that their personal opinion maybe isn't valued? How can we build that confidence and that sense of belonging that they do have a say in their education and in their experiences? And we see that this changes as children go through different phases of their education. Primary pupils being quite positive, saying yes, pupil opinion is valued in their schools, and then we see a significant drop in secondary pupil sentiments about this, and then it upticks again in post-16. Why is that? What can we take from these settings to improve that? But of course, there are also, just children developmental changes that happen as they go into secondary. The structures of our schools are different in those settings that we need to take into account when we're analyzing this information. And schools cannot solve this alone, right? Like we said in the beginning, this is about pupils and parents. And we have to figure out how we can continue to renew that social contract between educators and families and children, one that puts connection, purpose, and well-being back into the center of what we're trying to do. And Leanne Bridgewood from Windsor Academy Trust gives us this wonderful reminder that parents love and adore their children. They want what's best for them. And I think whenever we receive feedback from parents, David in the previous session mentioned the 1 a.m. email coming from a disgruntled parent. I think we should always remind ourselves to use that filter of what are the best intentions that these parents are coming to us with. How can we listen to them more deeply to really get under the hood of that? So we look at what parents say. Do they feel that their feedback to their school has their child's school has an impact? And again, we see a pretty evenly spread set of data. 34% yes, feedback has an impact always or most of the time. 38% see feedback having an impact rarely or never. So once again, I can ask you that question. Think about what are those blockers? What are those things that are hindering parents from feeling that their feedback is reaching the school, reaching the people that are impacting, that are working with their children? How can we close those feedback loops better, more clearly, communicate that clearly for parents so that they have that sense that their feedback is being taken into account? And this trend is once again seen across phases. Parents with a child in primary feel that their feedback to the school has more of an impact. It drops again for parents with a child in secondary, and then upticks again in post-16. But I think that really begs that reflection of what are we doing in each of these contexts to make sure that feedback is being used and that we are feeding that loop back to our stakeholders, that their feedback does have an impact for us. And once again, a quote from Leanne from Windsor Academy Trust, that data is the question, it is not the answer. I've now shown you a lot of information about pupil happiness, pupil voice, and parent voice in our data sets. It's time to ask some questions from the people who are doing it well. So I'm very happy to introduce Rob Marsh, the executive principal at Trinity Met, representing 3 top performing schools for parental engagement, pupil happiness, and pupil choice. Rob, please, if you're there, tell us a little bit about yourself, tell us a little bit about Trinity Met, and yeah, any comments or first reactions to the data that I just shared.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you for your time this morning. Really great to hear the conversation. Caught the end of the last group speaking, and there were lots of messages which thread through. We are a small trust, perhaps growing into medium-sized trust, 11 schools. We work in Yorkshire, and we also are an associate college for the National Institute of Teaching. And we also have White Rose Education as part of our trust. Some of you may know and be aware of White Rose. I've worked for the trust for longer than I can remember. I've been part of it for an awful long time, and you know, seen the journey of many schools that have joined us, and within that, the communities that we work in. So the communities in terms of the parents and parental engagement, but also the students and how they work with us to give us feedback that help us shape our direction. So I suppose my initial sort of thoughts as you're speaking is that tying in very much with what people were talking about on the last call, effectively, it's about creating a culture. It's about that keyword culture, which is easily said and bandied around and written about, but how you create a culture where feedback is welcomed and that children and parents feel that they do have a voice, and there's a space for that to happen, and looking for opportunities for that to be part of your everyday culture is really where we have found success in that respect. And sometimes feedback and communication from parents and students isn't always comfortable, isn't always what you want to hear, but it's about promoting discussion, because sometimes I think that we have to make decisions which might not on the face of it be seen as a positive, but it's all about the why. So really important for us in Trinity Matt is the rationale, talking to students and parents, communicating. I heard the phrase earlier about over communicate. I think it's really important to do that and over communicate your message and your why when you make decisions and when you're introducing things. But taking that feedback at face value and really, as you stated, maybe putting it through that filter of what are the intentions of the people giving that feedback. Sometimes you can have an emotional reaction to it if it's negative feedback, but actually thinking that everybody has a perspective, and that perspective is fueled by various different cultural upbringing, background, and, you know, actually taking that at value and asking what is it we want to do with this information to help us shape where we move forward. So I guess that's my initial thoughts.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes, thank you for being here today and for sharing those initial reactions. I think that building that culture, understanding the context behind the feedback that we collect and how we can filter that into what we're working on is absolutely key. Claire Gething from Windsor Academy Trust, the Director of Communications, joining us today representing top performing schools for pupil happiness and parental engagement. Welcome, Claire.
Thanks, Amanda. And yeah, hello everybody. Yeah, so I'm Claire Gething, Director of Communications at Windsor Academy Trust. I also sit on the executive team there. So we are 15 schools across the West Midlands. We have 7 primary schools and 8 secondary schools. We're a regional trust, and most of our schools are centred around learning communities where we can bring schools together locally for collaboration, but also all of our schools are within an hour of our centre point, so we can bring the whole family together when we need to as well. Most of our schools are located in former educational priority education investment areas. So we've got double the national proportion of disadvantaged children in our primaries and a third in our secondaries. And I suppose that's an intentional part of our growth strategy in terms of we take those schools in the communities where we feel we can make the greatest difference to the lives of children, the families and the communities that we serve. Our strategy is built around 5 big moves, but within that we have enablers, and communication is one of those. That's the area that I lead, and the stakeholder voice work that we do sits within that. And I suppose to build on what Rob was saying there at the start about culture, I think, you know, that's a really important part of this, and embedding this into the work that you do, that actually if you have a culture of listening, you create a culture of belonging, and that's for our children, that's for our staff, but it's also our parents and our wider communities as well. We have a moral purpose of unlocking academic and personal potential for all children. Coming back to that point around starting with your why. And I just don't believe it's possible to do that unless you are connected to the front line, so to speak, and taking voice of the people, that team around the child. So as you can see, it's something that we take very seriously. It's built into our strategy, but it's also looked at all levels of our organisation. So we have that clear line of sight right up to board, and to make sure that voice is factored into all the decision making that we do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining, Claire. Now that we've had a bit of an introduction, I think we're ready for the discussion, and I'll stop sharing so that we can all see one another better. There we go. And yeah, I think this topic about pupil and parent voice is very important, and like you both kind of mapped out, it's part of the culture, it's part of the greater goal of what we're trying to achieve working in education. But both pupil and parent voice, I'd say, is very often left to the discretion of schools, and in some cases rightfully so, as they are the ones that are kind of with the closest relationship to pupils and parents. Trusts, very often want schools to be the first point of contact for parents, not the trust level. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at bigger trend monitoring across the trust. So to kind of start off this discussion, could you please both share kind of how you have used pupil and parent insights across your trust central strategies specifically? How are you making sure that feedback is fed up from the schools, down also down to the schools? And how are you using that information to inform your decisions at that trust level? Claire, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I mentioned at the start there this idea of this connection to the front line. And there's a great book called The Founder's Mentality by Zuck and Allen, which as an executive team we have read and studied at length, and really thought about where voice sits within our strategy. So as I mentioned, we have a number of enablers within our strategy. Communication is one of them. And so we have made sure that that stakeholder voice piece is firmly cited there. And I suppose the very fact that me as a director of communications sits on the executive team hopefully signals the importance that's placed on making sure that we communicate effectively, but part of effective communication is effective listening and how you respond to that. So I guess communication has a seat at the table, which is really, really important to make sure that then it does enable the work that we're doing within our strategy. But I think it's about how that's enacted and how it's implemented. And Amanda, you mentioned there about sometimes that's left at school level, sometimes it might be trust level. And I don't think it has to be either or. I think you can have and. But I think what you need to do is have a very clear plan and synergy around how you do that. So we're very intentional at the start of every academic year about planning our voice work in for 12 months. And that would be what we're driving centrally. But then we make sure that we're sharing that with our head teachers so that they can see what the plan is for voice work across the family, and then they can build in what they would like to do then at a school level that kind of either builds on that work or is in addition to the work that we're doing. And I suppose we have been really intentional about this. It's very much part of our culture now. So it takes numerous different forms, from surveys, focus groups, we have student senates, we have parent panels, our CEO goes into schools and does visits and listens then. And is very much aligned to our values of kind of collaboration and respect as well. So the most important bit, I think, is if you go out and listen to people, is that you do something with that. And I'll perhaps talk a little bit later about exactly what we do with that. But you need to have those mechanisms built in to bring that voice into decision making at all levels, right back up to board level. And I think as somebody who sits on the executive team and has responsibility for that, I am the conduit for doing that and make sure that we have that represented at all levels. So for us, it's very much part of our culture, but actually it's a key enabler in terms of how we implement our strategy effectively.
Wonderful. Rob.
Yes, thank you. What we've done at Trinity really is similarly to what Claire was speaking about, is really make it an intentional part of strategy. So we developed, as a central executive team, which includes all the head teachers, we developed a strategy on a page which brings together all of our strategic pillars and our big moves. And on that, obviously, stakeholder engagement became something that all head teachers felt was really, really important. So through that, we sort of identified that, you know, nothing groundbreaking here, but really putting this in strategy, that we know that all decisions center around the students. So any decision that's taken is about the best for the students. And that's within our stakeholder engagement section, knowing that we're always thinking like that. And to enable that to be as successful as it possibly can be, listening to students about their experience and listening to parents about what they want in their community, what they have in their community, and what their aspirations are, is an important part of that. So we placed it as at the center of the strategy in terms of our written documentation, but also then living that out in terms of making sure that it was part of what the executive team discuss and refer to. So through that, one example is our cross multi-academy trust reviews. So any review that takes place across our trust brings together specialist teams from within the trust that specialise in a specific domain and look at reviewing the practice in another school. So as part of that, student voice is always central to that. So in every review that we're doing, we're making sure that student voice is part and parcel, and that information is fed back up to executive team across the trust and shared and discussed. So certainly across the trust, there's a layer of understanding that we are collecting student voice and we are listening to that and we are sharing it centrally and discussing ways forward. But equally then at a school level, principals very much have at the heart pupil voice and parental voice in what they are doing. So there is quite a variety of approaches to that in our schools. So we do believe in that healthy difference. So whilst there is a strategy across the trust in individual schools, collecting student voice beyond Edurio surveys, beyond the standard reviews that we do, there will be some innovative approaches that are taking place within schools, and we encourage that. However, we ensure that those good ideas are shared through our cross-mat networks that meet 3 times a year and through our principals network that meets 6 times a year. So if there's a particularly successful strategy taking place, a principal will present on that to the other principals in the trusts, and it will also be interrogated. It's not just about celebrating good things, but the principals are really good at agitating an issue or a project and asking the questions to help refine it and improve it. So again, it's a central part of our strategy, but with some freedom to really understand the community at principal level as well.
Thank you. I really, I'm a big champion of doing that trust level planning and making sure that the trust goals for that academic year are clear. And then, like you said, Claire, everyone else can kind of build in around what other voice work we want to do. And I think, Rob, your example about how you bring everyone together throughout the year to talk about that voice work and weave that in, that shows that consistency, but also that freedom to flex and work around the things that you are collecting and learning along the way is really critical. We saw in the data earlier that I showed that there are these differences between primary and secondary, both pupils and parents, about how they feel about the value and impact of their feedback on their schools. So I kind of want to dive into this a little bit more. Do you think that mechanisms for collecting feedback are or should be the same in both phases? In your trusts, maybe you can share some examples. Do different activities, for example, work better in different contexts? How do we get to that parent that is not coming to the school gate anymore? How can we make that and build that relationship with them? Or is there something else behind the difference that we're seeing in these responses from primary and secondary, both pupils and parents?
Okay, right, thank you. So I think so. In terms of the mechanisms, there obviously are a range of different tools that we can use to get voice from different stakeholders. I think the Adurio surveys are a really great place to start, because actually you can get that broader picture and it gives you a baseline from which you can then measure and benchmark when you move forward. But you are absolutely right. There are differences between those two phases. Some of that, particularly with parents, is around that experience that they have with school. It's a very different experience for a parent in a primary setting than it is in a secondary setting, when children become more independent and you are separated a little bit more from that educational experience. But I think particularly where we've got difficult groups to engage with, as you've mentioned there, I think it's important to understand perhaps why they're not engaging, and that will be for a variety of reasons. And we've often talked about this. Well, actually, if we're going to send a survey out to our children, which we do the Adurio one biannually. Actually, if they're the children that don't attend school, we're going to miss their voice in that. So how do you make sure that you are capturing those diverse voices across both your parents and your students? And it is really, really difficult to do that. So a survey, a one-size-fit approach doesn't always work, and you lose some of the voice there. So I think it's about tailoring your approach and understanding what's right for different cohorts. So it might be that you do your surveys to give you that broader picture, but then it's important that you take the findings. We always say when we look at the results of the surveys, just observe them to begin with. I think you put a quote up earlier about data is the question, not the answer, and that's exactly that. Observe the results, but then you need to talk to people to really understand the why that sits behind that. And that's where focus groups and one-to-ones really come into their own. And also, if there are barriers to people giving voice, it's really important that you look at how you overcome those. So if you are planning to do a survey, but you know that there are language barriers perhaps within your parent community, how can you support parents with doing that? So we have a school in Winston Green in Birmingham where we have real challenges there around language and literacy levels with parents. And so we invite them in. So we'll bring them in after school, we'll put on some refreshments, and we'll sit there with iPads and we'll help them answer the survey just to make it more accessible to them. And there are lots of other things you can do in order to make it more accessible. But I do think you need to have your broader mechanisms, but then you really need to think about those hard to engage with groups and the voices you might miss if you don't take a more tailored approach somewhere along the way. And building that relational trust, particularly with parents and at secondary level, can be challenging. So we'll probably come on to this, but making sure that you're feeding back in terms of the insights that you gather is really important for building that over time.
Thanks, Claire. Just to build on that, in terms of understanding your point there, Imanta, around it changes over time. And I think, first of all, a real recognition that it is different. If we take students at primary, just for their enthusiasm about everything about life generally, they are very willing to be involved in celebration and feedback and opinion. I think it becomes more difficult in secondary school, where students are growing up and they are experiencing that adolescence. They are working through that process of trying to find their independence, whilst also knowing that what they need is structure and support and tough love and challenge, as well as that listening ear. So I think that we do adapt our approaches across our phases, really. And listening, I think, is really important. We've said that already, but one of the things we do in our trust is, a project called Known, Valued and Understood. And so we really have a focus on understanding what it is that helps empower young people to have a voice and what it is they want to have input in. So, for example, at secondary and post-16, there's a lot coming through student voice about we want to understand the world of AI and we want to be shown the way and given support and guidance on how to navigate safely. That's coming through strongly. Interestingly, that's a real challenge for teachers and schools because it's progressing at such a rapid rate. But as a result of that, we've got a real strategy for next academic year about about the now, supporting people for the here and now with AI, and then helping to build support for the future. So that's come from student voice, and that's come from listening and taking a little bit of a different approach at post-16 and secondary than we would around our known, valued, understood agenda. And we do that through something that we've called Principals Breakfast, which is a themed session with small focus groups of students who come and talk to us about issues that they feel are important to them. And that we give them some breakfast, we give them the ear of the principal and the senior team, and we then really see lots of things coming through those ideas to then come into fruition for our strategy in the following year. So I think students really value, certainly the older students, where they are seeing that their voice can make a difference. So lots of opportunities to be ambassadors, to be involved in shaping that voice is really, really important. And I think parentally, it's really more difficult at secondary. At primary, we find that the parents are in that playground picking up most days, and that they will come ahead and talk to staff about anything that's bothering them. There will be a real first name terms with staff, so there's a real conduit for that. Obviously, there's a little bit more work goes on with harder to reach families, but we find that that's more of a natural, organic feedback loop. At primary, at secondary, that contact becomes more difficult. So our strategy is around trying to get parents in through engagement with information evenings, celebratory events. Something we've done, which has been really successful in some of our schools, is sort of really ramp up that work in terms of transition. So rather than just having a transition day for students, actually meeting every parent one-to-one with a member from senior team. It's very time intensive, but actually sort of exploring those. What are you expecting from us? What have you've chosen us? This is what we can offer you. This is what to expect from us. This is how you can engage. And really understanding some of the perceptions about school from that very early point has really helped to break down some of the barriers, rather than perhaps leaving it till October and then contacting them when there's a problem. So we found that to be really effective. But yes, it definitely changes, and we've adapted over the age groups.
Thank you. I think, yeah, so someone that we interviewed said it like that, where you don't know what it's like to be a child growing up in today's age unless you ask. And I think because the experience of children today is so dramatically different than the adults that are whose care they are in, that it's very important to continue to get into their heads. What are they worried about? What are they interested in? Where do they want support? And likewise for their parents, who are also going through this with them next to their children in this society as it is today. I want to kind of close that feedback loop, and we all know that a critical part of the feedback cycle is taking action and feeding back to our respondents, closing that feedback loop for them so that they see that their feedback has been taken into account, and they can see that action that is taken. So the question is, how do you communicate back to your pupils and parents about the outcomes of the feedback that they've given? How are you doing at the trust levels, but also how are you supporting schools to communicate that back at the school level?
Yeah, shall I kick that off? So I think it's really important when you're doing any stakeholder work that we include pupils, parents in the whole process. So if I take the Adurio surveys as the example, and then I'll talk about what we do with that. So when we get a survey back, so if we did a trust-wide pupil experience or a trust-wide parent experience survey, so the pupil experience survey, we will then look at that as an executive team. And we have a process that we use with everybody as part of this. We have a 10-10-10 rule. So we have 10 minutes as a team to just look at the survey report and just observe what it's telling us. Then we have a 10-minute discussion around what are we pleased with? And then we have a 10-minute discussion of what can't we live with? And we sort of capture the what can't we live bit. We then do that collectively with all of our head teachers as a leadership team. So we'll look at the trust-wide report and do that same process with them. And then the next bit is to take it into school level. So we'll take it into school level and we'll get all of our staff together. So we'll do this perhaps in a CPL session after school. We get all the staff together and we put them on tables in groups. They get 10 minutes to look at the report. We have virtual whiteboards. They capture 10 minutes of what we're really pleased with and 10 minutes of what can't we live with. And the what can't we live with bit, and we do this with pupils as well, with the pupil survey, the what can't we live with bit is the bit we then take into focus groups. So for our students, we will then do mixed year groups of students, and often we get our student senate to help lead some of this as well with a member of SLT to actually understand why people have responded in the way they have. So those what can't we live with, we'll take 3 or 4 of those into focus groups and get the children to tell us exactly why they have responded in the way that they have, so that we can then start to action plan. We do the same with our staff surveys, we do the same with our parent surveys as well. We get parents in to come and have a look at that with us as well. And then as part of those focus group sessions, we want to explain the why, but we also want to get people involved in helping us come up with the solutions as well. So we have that discussion at that focus group level to say, okay, you've told us this, you've told us that's why you feel. What do you think might be the solutions there? And then that's something that we can take away as a school, as an SLT, as an executive team across the trust to start to do that action planning. And then what we're really intentional about is then sharing that action plan back with staff, students, parents, in terms of this is what you told us, this is the feedback you've given us, we've really tried to understand why, and these are the things that we're going to put in place to try and address some of the challenges that have been identified. So we just try to make sure we keep it really, really simple with that 10-10-10, and then make sure that we're communicating and feeding that back. And as and when changes are implemented, making sure that we shout and celebrate about those as well. And then we will make sure we do a follow-up survey, so pulse surveys around a particular theme that's been identified through the process, just to check in and see how we're doing and to see if there's any more action we need to take.
Wonderful. And before you give your answer, Rob, I will just say that we have a spotlight with Claire sharing this exact process of focus groups on our website, and we'll share a link in the chat. Rob, how about you?
Yes, I'm going to struggle to top that. I love that 10-10-10 approach. It's really, really clear, structured, and focused. So yeah, I'm not surprised you've got a spotlight on that. It sounds great. We effectively use the surveys. We have somebody at Central which collates any trends coming through. So what we identified a couple of years ago through that survey and trends coming through was lots of student concern around the environment, around how they can be active, courageous advocates regarding environment. So we, and just to say, we use the Edurio surveys, but we also do other themed surveys within our schools, depending on what's coming through. So this information came through our various surveys, and from that we identified that we wanted a trust strategy, and we launched something called Trinity Mat Earthshot, which is something which engages the whole trust, every member of staff, every student and every family involved. So I think there's some really sort of clear big moves that we've made that are in response to students' feedback, and everybody can get involved. So communicating that, then it's about celebrating that, promoting awareness, showing people how they can get involved, and continuing to push that across our trust. So that's something about a long-term strategy that's come through surveys. So from our analysis of trends coming through surveys at executive level, there will be strategic decisions made about ways forward. Further to that, at school level, it's really quite traditional in that we really believe in school councils discussing those issues. So what we will do is take any issues that are emerging themes within a school to a school council to discuss with students about what the more deeper level qualitative understanding of whatever's come through the survey is across our student body, and that will then lead to action. So there'll be really clear actions taken at student council level, and that will come to students through assemblies, and they will have input in actually delivering the ways forward regarding that. I think then I heard someone earlier say it, and we do use this, and it's quite common, I know, but it's quite effective, is that you said we did approach, you said you'd like to see this, this and this. We have put our focus, our finance and energies into creating this for you. And I know it's not exciting, but an example of that I can give you is school toilets. Lovely places that they are, but it was clearly coming through student voice that toilets was the place that they did feel a little bit less comfortable, and that they weren't always in the best condition. So we put a lot of funding and a lot of time into creating those toilet blocks where the wash areas are really open plan, safe spaces, that students can feel safe, and that all cubicles are individual cubicles, and it's a personal experience going to the toilet. And that's really transformed how students feel about, that fear of going behind a closed door in a closed wash area and things going on in terms of a response to, obviously, Ofsted survey in 2021. So I think we've really been able to listen to students and act on things. Might not be very exciting, the toilets, but certainly really important in how safe and secure students feel. And school council, and you said we did, have been a key part of communicating that back to our communities.
Thank you very much. We have come to the very quickly to the end of the session, but I would like still to get one last bit from each of you. What would be one piece of advice that you would give to a trust that is trying to do something different with their pupil and parent voice strategy?
Yeah, so I think, I think this should sit in every trust strategy. I think it's a really integral part of it. I think for me, there's two things. I think it takes time to do this work well, and you can make it overly complicated if you're not careful. So I think really thinking about the capacity that you've got to deliver this, both at central and school level, is really important, and building that time in and having that commitment across your family of schools to do this work. And then the second bit then, because it can be time consuming, is to keep it as simple as possible, which is why that 10 minutes of observing, 10 minutes of looking at what you're really pleased with, and 10 minutes of looking at what you're not pleased with allows you to just do that piece of work in 30 minutes as a Trust Central team, as a school, and then pull it all together. So for me, build the capacity in and then keep it really simple.
Thanks. Yes. For myself, I would say that it's really important that you think about that qualitative information coming through, and the quality of what you are listening to is more important than the quantity in some senses. So the Edurio surveys and other surveys will give us lots of quantitative information, lots of it, but actually those smaller engagements with focus groups really give. So I would focus on getting that right and having fewer things going on, but really listening to them and trying to have actions that are responding completely to them. And then I suppose the second thing would be that it's really important, it came through earlier, this approach of, with any feedback, we need to park our egos and really listen. So that idea that feedback is a gift, really think about what it's telling us from different perspectives, rather than being precious about what has gone before or what we think is necessarily right. So I think it's really important to have that approach when you are listening to feedback.